That sum would have to be paid in goods as well as money. Most would come from here in the Ruhr, the industrial heart of Germany. But at the end of 1922, the Germans fell behind with their payments, and Raymond Poincaré, the new French Prime Minister, decided to act. If Germany wouldn't pay in full and on the nail, then France would help herself. So, on the 11th of January 1923, French and Belgian troops entered the Ruhr to force the Germans to pay up. There was, of course, after Versailles, no German army big enough to stop them. At first, the French believed that they could make the Germans work for them. But suddenly, German politicians and people were united in a common cause, hatred of the French, and huge protest meetings were held all over Germany. Workers in the Ruhr refused to cooperate with the enemy, and the German government supported the strikers. Germany's industrial heart stopped beating, and the goods trains, which should have been carrying German wealth to France, lay idle in the sidings. The French hit back by bringing in their own workers to get things moving again. Their attitude towards the Germans in the Ruhr began to harden. They tried to cut the Ruhr off from the rest of the country. German visitors were searched as if they were entering a foreign land. They deported the leaders of the passive resistance, German officials, and even the police. The result was violence. German workers had been killed in riots at Essen in March. Their funeral was turned into a vast demonstration of protest. Hatred grew. Germans began killing French soldiers, and at the funeral for one of them, tempers flared into acts of brutality. "1923 was disastrous for Germany. In that year, the great German inflation reached its peak. For some time, the value of the mark had been dropping, and as the value of the notes decreased, so the amount of notes needed to buy things grew. Banks became more and more hard-pressed to meet the ever-increasing demand for paper money. For their customers, suitcases replaced wallets. To meet this crisis and pay the strikers in the Ruhr, the government simply printed more money. And as it lost its value, so it cost more and more to pay wages, to buy food. Hundreds of thousands. Millions, whatever figure was printed on the notes, really meant nothing. The German mark was worthless. As in a fearful dream, people's life savings were blown away like leaves in a gale. As Germany slid towards disaster, Gustav Stresemann was appointed Chancellor. It was a time of crisis. The loss of production in the Ruhr was making inflation even worse, and Stresemann realized that the only way to help the economy back to normal was to call off resistance there and get production going again. The government also announced that Germany would resume the payment of reparations. It was the only possible way of getting the French out. But to the nationalists, it looked like yet another pathetic surrender to Germany's enemies. General Ludendorff, who'd never accepted that Germany had been defeated, gave his support to Adolf Hitler, the leader of the new National Socialist Party. In Munich, the capital of Bavaria, they decided to try and overthrow the government. But Hitler's stormtroopers were not yet powerful enough and couldn't get the support of the army or the police. Their November uprising failed and merely ended in confusion and 14 deaths. Ludendorff and Hitler were put on trial for treason. Ludendorff was let off. Hitler was sent to prison, where he brooded on his failure for a few months in rather comfortable surroundings. Meanwhile, inflation was being brought under control. The old worthless money was called in and destroyed, and replaced by a new currency. At the same time, a committee under Charles Dawes, an American, was set up by the Allies to scale down the reparations so that Germany could afford to pay them. The German leaders came to London in 1924 and agreed to accept the Dawes Plan. Stresemann's policy of cooperation began to pay off at that meeting. The French agreed to pull out of the Ruhr within a year. Their occupation had been unpopular with their most important allies, especially Britain, who had refused to support their attempt to humiliate Germany. As German industry returned to normal after the chaos of occupation and inflation, Stresemann brought off another triumph, this time at Locarno in Switzerland. Under the Locarno Pact of 1925, France, Belgium and Germany agreed to respect the frontiers between them, and Britain said she'd support any country that was invaded. Old enmities seemed to be disappearing, and Germany no longer feared the threat of a French invasion. Finally, at Geneva in September 1926, Germany became a full member of the League of Nations. Aristide Briand, now Foreign Minister of France, welcomed Stresemann as an equal. It was all very friendly. By now, life in Germany appeared to be returning to normal. The Germans relaxed. The grim aftermath of the war, the humiliation of Versailles, the hysteria of 1923, all gradually faded beneath the surface of a new prosperity. For a defeated nation still paying for a lost war, the Germans appeared not to be doing badly. They could afford to live it up a little, have a good time.